Amazing reaction, millionaire discovers sick baby on cold floor, surprisingly transforms lives. Jim Tompkins turned the corner, headlights of his cab reflecting off the cracked pavement as he left the glimmering towers behind. Lauded as the king of Chicago's tech scene, he wore his success like a mantle, yet something gnawed at him. The swanky dinner had felt hollow, filled with hollow praise and obligatory laughter. As he peered through the windows at the Macy's parade of luxury, he felt the weight of envy and emptiness mingling in his gut. He had swum through opportunity, or so he thought. Could the kingdom he built really be nothing more than gilded emptiness? He decided to get out. The sharp bite of cold air would snap him back to reality. The cab dropped him in a neighborhood shrouded in shadows, flickering streetlights barely illuminating the cracked sidewalks. The contrast was jarring, a world far removed from his polished existence. Hesitation gnawed at him as he wandered the streets, a plush blazer tugging at his shoulders while the chill seeped into his bones. Voices echoed, but not triumphant ones. Whispers of hardship rode the wind. Then, an unsettling noise pierced through a baby's faint cries, muffled by the rundown walls of a nearby apartment building. Drawn in, something twisted in his chest. He hesitated at the creaking door before pushing it open, shivers racing down his spine. The scene unfolded before him like a horror he couldn't comprehend. A baby sprawled on a filthy floor beside an overturned crib. The sight condemned him, tore away the glamorous facade he had built. Here, in this filth, the palpable desperation screamed louder than the accolades he was accustomed to. For a moment, he simply stood there, heart pounding in his ears, wrestling with his instincts like an unwieldy storm. What could a man like him do? His hands trembled with guilt, wealth, privilege, power. They suddenly felt trivial, like a cruel joke. Each second stretched as he battled the demons of doubt that clawed at the edges of his mind. Every tailored suit felt like a noose, tightening around his purpose. Could he really make a difference? The question throbbed painfully, eating away at his resolve. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Days turned into sleepless nights, and he found himself consumed with thoughts of Clara, the child's mother. Their conversations laid bare layers upon layers of struggle he had never imagined in his insulated life. Each word she spoke dripped with determination, yet flickered with despair. He felt drawn to her spirit, yet overwhelmed by the sheer weight of her burdens. As he delved deeper, the shadows of his previous life loomed larger. Ambition and altruism collided violently in his mind. He envisioned a grand charity, a beacon of hope, but with each step forward, a rival grew bolder. Conflict threatened to unravel everything as he faced the stark realization that the American dream he once chased could become a nightmare if he wasn't careful. His heart raced with mounting conflict. Was he a benefactor or simply a trespasser in a world where he knew nothing? He stood on the precipice of a profound metamorphosis, questioning everything he thought he knew about success, power, and what it truly meant to support one another. The ticking clock echoed ominously in his mind, leaving him gasping for answers, longing for redemption. What kind of man would he choose to become? A storm brewed inside him, leaving no clear answer as the shadows lurked ever closer. Jim's heart raced as he replayed his conversations with Clara in his mind, the weight of her struggles ingrained in his consciousness. Their dialogues had unveiled a tapestry of life woven with heartbreak and resilience. For the first time, he began to question the very fabric of his existence, thinking back to the sterile boardrooms and polished negotiations that had once defined him. Staring at the crumbling walls of the apartment where Clara lived, he sensed a shift within himself. This was more than an infatuation with a cause, it was a call to arms, a profound awakening. He could no longer hide behind the facade of his opulence, secure in a world that felt increasingly irrelevant. Wasn't power most significant when wielded for the greater good? Yet the doubts twisted in his mind, gnawing at his resolve. Days later, he sat at his desk, papers strewn in chaotic disarray, a blend of hastily sketched ideas and half-formed plans. Each stroke of the pen was an attempt to solidify the vision that had invaded every waking moment and seeped into his restless dreams. This ink, however, felt heavy with the burdens of responsibility. What if he failed? The larger implications of his proposed charity loomed like a specter, demanding the irretrievable loss of his former comfort. He glanced at his phone, the familiar glint pulling him back toward the distractions of the affluent world he inhabited. Notifications blinked with news of lavish gatherings and the latest industry accolades he had once reveled in. But for the first time, he felt detached, like a spectator observing a stage play devoid of meaning. The hollow laughter, the empty conversations, it all seemed insipid against the backdrop of Clara's fierce spirit and the fragile life of her child. Resolved yet apprehensive, he drafted an invitation for his first meeting, hoping to gather support from a few trusted allies in the tech community. But sending it felt like ripping open a fresh wound, the potential excitement eclipsed by an overwhelming fear of judgment. What could they offer amidst the stories of suffering and neglect he had witnessed? He paced, wrestling with the notion that he might just be another opportunist, desperately seeking redemption cloaked in benevolence. The cycle of life within Clara's apartment painted a stark contrast to the sterile world outside, each hardship echoed by cries both igniting compassion and striking profound doubt in his core. Finally, he hit send, the urgent click cutting through the anxiety that had gripped him all afternoon. Anxiety morphed into a bubbling determination. There was more to Jim Tompkins than profits and gadgets. He was prepared to confront the shadows he had avoided for so long. This was no longer about his empire but a chance to forge a legacy that meant more than dollars and cents. However, as the invitations went out, the reality of the impending meeting raised a new tide of anxiety. What if those he once called friends scoffed at his new ambition? The fear whispered insidiously in the back of his mind, mixing with the urgency and purpose he felt pushing him forward. The meeting day dawned, and his stomach churned with equal parts trepidation and resolve. As the familiar faces gathered, he noted the flickers of skepticism mirrored in their eyes. But he had come too far to withdraw. This could be the moment that defined him, the pivotal decision opening doors toward redemption if only he could find the words. With a deep breath, he opened his mouth to speak, ready to unveil a promise that had burrowed into his very soul. The room echoed with anticipation, reflecting both hope and doubt. What would they say? Would they help him? And then came the crushing doubt, could he transform not just himself, but also the world he had long ignored? The moment felt suspended, crackling with tension, as all eyes trained on him expectantly. The stakes were higher than he'd ever faced, but the time had come to confront the very thing that could define him: failure, acceptance, or perhaps a flicker of hope. Jim stood at the head of the table, his heart pounding like a drummer at a festival, overwhelmed by the weight of his intentions and the acute awareness of the piercing gazes fixed upon him. The silence was palpable, an arena where hopes and doubts collided, trapping him between the yearning for approval and the fear of vulnerability. "Thank you all for coming," he finally managed, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I know you're all accustomed to the fastest routes to profitability, but today, I want to talk about something far more important than mere numbers." The words felt foreign, heavy with a sincerity that threatened to suffocate him. He watched as his colleagues perked up, some crossing their arms, while others leaned forward searching for cues in his eyes. They were accustomed to bottom lines, not heart lines. A few of them raised skeptical eyebrows, a silent challenge hanging in the air. He could sense their doubt. They were thinking he had lost sight of reality in the throes of a midlife crisis. "I spent time with Clara, the woman living in a rough part of town." He hesitated, drumming his fingers against the polished surface of the table, a habit he had developed as a child when faced with daunting truths. "She is not just a statistic, she is a mother trying to keep her child alive amid dire circumstances." And I realized that we have the power to change lives, to make a difference. Our affluence can be used not just for personal gain, but for genuine impact. At this, the room erupted with murmurs, the confusion palpable. A voice called out, "So, what exactly are you proposing?" It came from Mark, a longtime friend turned critic, his voice dripping with incredulity. Taking a breath, Jim steeled himself against the wave of shame threatening to crash over his resolve. "I want to create a foundation, a charity that focuses on providing essential resources and support for families like Clara's. We have the means, we just need to redirect our focus." A collective scoff emanated from the group, a cacophony that reminded him of the soft cries of Clara's child when they first met. Determination surged in his chest. "This is not just about charity. This is about repositioning ourselves. First, it's a moral imperative. Second, it's a smart business strategy." His voice sharpened, slicing through their disbelief like a jagged knife. "Imagine the impact we could have if we channeled our resources toward a sustainable model that empowers rather than simply giving alms." His confidence wavered as silence fell again, but he pressed on, racing against the tightness in his throat. "I need your help. I know that together, we can leverage our influence, our connections, not just to spread the word but to build something real, something that lasts." As he spoke, his emotions flared, carrying him on a tide of fervor until he felt truly alive. But the steadfast expressions of his peers seemed resistant. "What makes you think this will work?" Another voice challenged Alice, always practical and rarely swayed by passion. "Have you even considered the risks? It's a drastic shift from our usual business model. Are you ready for the fallout?" The question hung heavily in the air, reminiscent of Clara's last sigh of desperation. The memory grounded him, forcing him to confront the crux of his internal conflict. He took a moment, visualizing Clara's fierce spirit and tenacity. "If we scale and fail, at least we tried to help change lives. But if we do nothing, we are complicit in perpetuating the cycle of despair." Their skepticism remained, but Jim could see cracks forming, flickers of curiosity beginning to outshine the doubt. "Let us not just talk about change. Let us create it," he declared, heart thundering against his ribs. With a final inviting gesture, he pressed, "Who's in?" The moment brimmed with potential. He felt it vibrating in the air, a pulse of possibility. Yet as faces of uncertainty remained, a chilling fear clawed at Jim's gut. What if he stood alone in this battle? As he waited for the first voice of support to break the silence, something deeper began to unfurl inside him, a question far more urgent than anticipated. Would he be brave enough to forge ahead alone if necessary? The tension thickened, and the weight of the world seemed to rest squarely on his shoulders. The silence lingered, wrapping around Jim like a thick fog. He could feel each passing moment stretching into infinity, a time-lapse of anticipation and regret. The weight of their indecision pressed down on him, siphoning away any remaining vestiges of confidence. Could he really convince them to join him? As the seconds dragged on, Jim's thoughts spiraled into a tempest of uncertainty. He recalled the sincerity in Clara's eyes, the depth of her struggles, and a sudden sense of purpose flared within him. He was willing to carry the burden alone if it meant igniting even the smallest change in someone else's life. In that fragile moment, he recognized a haunting truth: his evolution depended not just on their approval, but on his own resolve. "Jim," Mark's voice cut through the stillness, bringing him back into the room. "What you're proposing could ruin our business. It sounds noble, but charity doesn't pay the bills. What about our shareholders? What would they think?" Jim felt an instinctive urge to deflect, to rally his colleagues against Mark's attack. But instead, he paused, allowing himself to sit with the question. It echoed the very fears that had wormed their way into his heart. He had always been driven by profit, by what housed his ambition. But now, was he ready to risk that ambition for something more profound? He lifted his chin, forcing his gaze to meet Mark's unwavering stare. "And losing ourselves in the pursuit of profit is worthwhile?" At what point did we agree that money defines success? What will we tell ourselves when we look in the mirror? That our best isn't good enough? The challenge hung between them, electrifying the air and stirring a flicker of intrigue in the others. He could see them weighing the possibility of change. But doubt still reigned. Alice broke in again, her tone sharper. "Jim, I see what you're trying to do, but think about the consequences. If this doesn't work, we'll learn," he interrupted, a mix of frustration and resolve igniting his voice. "Isn't that what business is about? Learning from failures? I refuse to let fear crush our potential for impact. What if we succeed? Those families need us." Her eyes narrowed slightly, assessing him as if he were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Perhaps she sensed something shifting within him, the possibility that he might indeed be willing to take this leap of faith. "And then what? You work on this foundation and leave business behind?" "Maybe," he responded, barely catching the taste of his own words. They dripped with uncertainty, yet behind them lay a burgeoning clarity. He was at a crossroads where professional success and personal fulfillment intersected, and perhaps that intersection was where his true value resided. "I know," he continued, softer now, "it sounds unconventional. But think about what we could achieve if we led with purpose. You all have seen the numbers. People are becoming disenchanted with companies focused solely on profit. Imagine being ahead of the curve." The tension shifted, and he could feel fragments of their skepticism fray. He leaned in, emboldened by the glimmer of hesitance he could see in their eyes. "We can redefine our legacy. If we approach this with skill, we can build something that transcends our immediate needs. What if we not only operated a successful business but transformed lives along the way?" In that moment, Jim realized he was not just making a case for a charity. He was beckoning them to envision their own growth, their own revelations about their capabilities. Each of them held the potential to be instrumental in this journey, to experience the unique satisfaction that speculation cannot quantify. As the murmurs in the room intensified, Jim took a deep breath, steadying himself against the swell of uncertainty. Behind their questioning expressions might lay a new resolve forming, a willingness to step onto a path less trodden. "Let us turn this doubt into a challenge," he urged, the fervor in his voice rising once more. "Let us not just change lives, we will discover more about ourselves in the process." With that, he felt the tide shift, a tangible energy surged through the room, bringing a sense of hope. There was a collective heartbeat now, a shared frequency of potential waiting to be explored. As he stood there, buoyed by the warmth of emerging possibility, Jim thought about the foundations of his identity, his values, ambition, and fears, and something more awaited him just beyond this moment. But as doubts mingled with sparks of curiosity, one lingering thought gripped him: were they now ready to confront their own personal transformations, or would the prospect of change terrify them into retreat? Energy crackled in the dimly lit conference room, a mix of hope and fear simmering beneath the surface. Jim stood at the center of this tension, his heart pounding as the gaze of his colleagues bore down on him. It was as if the air pulsated with the weight of a collective decision hovering just out of reach. He knew the stakes had escalated beyond the boardroom, they were now teetering on the brink of a fundamental shift in their lives. Mark's expression had softened marginally, his brows furrowing in contemplation, a sign that maybe, just maybe, Jim's proposition resonated. But Alice, with her unwavering pragmatism, leaned forward in her seat, dissecting the prospect with sharpened clarity. "But who manages the risks, Jim? Transforming lives is admirable, but how do we ensure it doesn't swallow us whole?" In that moment, Jim felt the tide rising again, a familiar narrative threatening to pull him under. It was the well-worn script of self-doubt, the chorus echoing in the back of his mind, warning him of the dangers of trying to navigate the uncharted waters of altruism in a world so obsessed with economic gain. But this time, he resisted its pull. Maybe we don't. Maybe we embrace uncertainty. Growth doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from leaning into discomfort, from taking chances. I don't think our shareholders would want to see a sinking ship. They want adaptability. Alice's eyes narrowed, sharpening into the focus of a hawk ready to strike. And your personal stake, Jim? What makes this change important for you? A question that rattled Jim from the depths of his thoughts and bubbled up an ocean of truths he'd buried under corporate ambition. His voice, raw and vulnerable, slipped out almost before he could censor it. Because I don't want to look back at the years spent chasing numbers, wondering if I've ever truly made a difference. What's the legacy I leave? A fat bank account or lives touched in ways I couldn't always see? Silence enveloped the room again, the kind that weighs heavily, forcing every individual to confront their ghosts. It was this silence that Jim understood, reflected in Clara's struggles and the faces of those he had seen in need. This moment was no longer just a business proposal, it mimicked the heartbeat of a man wrestling with his own convictions. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. So, what's the plan then? We redefine our entire business model on this hunch? The air thickened as Jim sensed the unfolding moment where clarity could emerge, not just for himself, but for Mark and Alice too. Jim glanced at the framed vision board on the wall, filled with aspirations they had crafted together. Yes. Begin with a pilot initiative. We'll dedicate a fraction of our resources to support a small community project. If it fails, we adjust, if it thrives, we learn and expand. But we have to embrace the unknown with courage. The uncertainty palpable, Jim's resolve ignited something within him. He hadn't just proposed a project, he was challenging their identities, the very foundations that had been built on predictability and comfort. A ripple of contemplation coursed through the room. Jim's heart raced as he noticed the slightest nod from Clara, a spark of conviction igniting behind her typically guarded eyes. She seemed willing to cross the bridge with him, despite the vast chasm of doubt that had loomed moments ago. Well, Alice finally said, her tone shifting as if evaluating a newfound possibility, I suppose it's worth considering. If we all believe in something bigger than ourselves, maybe we can find a way to balance purpose and profit. Mark chuckled softly, albeit reluctantly. Well, that's an optimistic view. But optimism only goes so far, decisions must be grounded in reality. Can't they be both? Jim countered, animated by the budding momentum surrounding him. If we start with small, actionable steps, the impact could, over time, shift our entire direction. Instead of merely adopting a charity approach, we innovate and grow alongside those we hope to help. For the first time, Jim noticed a flicker of excitement in Alice's demeanor, however guarded it was. But then, a deep-seated anxiety confronted him again, overshadowing the moment. Was he truly ready to step beyond the safety of tradition? Did he possess the resilience to reconcile his growing vision with the relentless pressure of capitulating to market demands? Would they follow him down this challenging path, or was it wishful thinking? As he pondered these questions and felt the enormity of the decision stretching ahead, he sensed a deep yearning within himself, to be more than a player in the game, but a force for transformation. Let us walk this path together, he urged, instilling urgency in his voice. Let us allow ourselves to be transformed by this experience, discovering strengths and values that perhaps we didn't even know existed within each of us. But just as the flame of potential began to flicker brighter, a chilling thought slithered into his mind. Could their tentative steps into this new approach fracture the very fabric of their professional relationships? Would they find themselves entrapped in a battle against their own aspirations? The silence that followed was pregnant with tension, leaving Jim in delicate anticipation. The moment was brewing. It was here that the unrealized potential of their collaboration could take flight, or shatter under the weight of their fears. Would they rise together, or splinter apart? The air was thick with possibility, yet suffocating in its weight. Jim's pulse quickened as he awaited the response from Alice and Mark, two pillars of stability within the chaotic structure of their business. Doubt, that insidious whisper, crept into the corners of his mind as he assessed their reactions. What if they saw the risks as insurmountable? What if this was a bridge too far? Mark broke the silence, shifting gears. All right, Jim. I'll admit, there's a glimmer of merit in your vision. But what makes you think a small pilot would be enough? Resources are finite, and failure could mean far more than just a setback. Jim inhaled sharply, grounding himself in the moment. He had wrestled with these questions countless times. He needed to harness his own fears and transform them into words of conviction. We take calculated risks. If we don't test the waters, how can we ever hope to innovate? What if this small investment leads to something extraordinary? Isn't that worth the chance? Alice crossed her arms, her expression a mask of skepticism. Extraordinary is subjective. We need measurable outcomes, not dreams. Measurable outcomes come from dreams that are turned into actionable plans, Jim countered, grappling with the creeping sense of inadequacy. He recalled the countless hours spent juggling numbers and projections, always playing it safe. But that had led him to this point, a precipice where corporate ambition began to blur with personal fulfillment. I have to ask myself if I'm this leader I've always aspired to be, he thought. Am I going to let fear dictate my decisions now that the stakes have never felt higher? We can synthesize both, Mark suggested cautiously, softening the edge of Alice's stern viewpoints. Let us agree on metrics we can track: success rates, budget impact, employee engagement. If we're going to embark on this journey, let us establish parameters. Parameters can limit creativity, Jim replied, the urgency surging through him. Let South not place the box around our ideas before we let them grow. The truth hung heavy in the air. He was terrified of saying what he truly thought, fearing that radical honesty might fracture the fragile hope emerging around him. Alice uncrossed her arms, leaning forward, her expression shifting. Okay, let us proceed with the pilot. But Jim, this is your vision, we're supporting you. If this fails, you're the one we'll hold accountable for the aftermath. There was an unyielding challenge in her tone, an acknowledgement of courage wrapped in caution. Jim nodded, but the full weight of her words pressed deeper. Accountability was a mantle he never wished to wear alone. I can take that on. If this fails, I'll find a way to lead us back to success, but please know that failure doesn't mean we stop believing. His mind raced ahead, envisioning himself teaching others, guiding the initiative to fruition, and more significantly, shaping a team ready to embrace transformation. Mark uttered a low chuckle. Well, now it's more than just business, it's an adventure. Alice quipped, or a gamble. We'll need to prepare for some serious navigating through turbulent waters. But just as the room seemed to brighten with the potential of this newfound direction, a voice nagged at him, a reminder of the dangers of ambition without careful consideration. He wasn't just facing a professional crossroads, he was challenging insecurities deeply embedded within himself. In the precarious dance between excitement and dread, Jim felt a stirring realization. He hadn't merely sought to reshape their business, he was unearthing a new version of himself, one where authenticity and purpose began to unite. But as they began to sketch out the foundational plans for their pilot initiative, an unsettling thought arose: if this venture thrived, what transformation might that trigger not just within the company but within him? Would he be ready to lead a team transformed, or would the shadows of old fears resurface to sabotage his best intentions? With the tension still thick, he pondered the monumental shift waiting on the horizon. As they wrapped up meeting logistics, Jim's heart raced at the dawning realization. The moment had come to embrace his own transformation, yet how far could he stretch himself before the very fabric of who he believed he was began to unravel? Jim stepped out of the meeting room, the door closing behind him with a soft thud that echoed in the stillness of the hallway. The adrenaline from the conversation with Alice and Mark surged within him, yet alongside it weaved a thread of anxiety that prickled at the edges of his mind. He was stepping into an unknown territory, a venture that not only risked company resources but also threatened the very identity he had carefully constructed over the years. As he made his way to his office, he pondered the weight of accountability. The idea of failure loomed large. It wasn't just about the loss of a project or the financial setback, it was about how it would reflect on him as a leader. Jim halted at a window overlooking the bustling city outside. He watched people move about, each absorbed in their lives, oblivious to the tumult brewing within him. Doubt tap danced in his thoughts. Was he prepared to lead not just through successes but through potential failures? The foundation of his comfort had always been in calculations and predictability. How did I end up here? He wondered. There was a stark contrast between the meticulous strategist and the visionary he was now aspiring to be. He returned to his desk, steeling himself for the tasks ahead. The initial excitement of the pilot project had ignited something in him, a passion that had lain dormant beneath the surface of spreadsheets and quarterly reports. He resolved to channel this energy into action. Jim pulled out a fresh notepad, and with each stroke of the pen, he began to outline the specifics of the pilot project. He envisioned brainstorming sessions, inviting collaboration to elevate creativity. What could they learn about their processes? What innovations could they explore? Swiftly, he jotted down potential goals, metrics, and initiatives that would not only track performance but also foster an open mindset among his team. But as he wrote, the questions that had plagued him resurfaced. Was he capable of inspiring confidence? If he stumbled, how would he regain that trust? Each uncertainty felt like a stone lodged within him, waiting to break free. Then came a moment of clarity. The crux of his anxiety was rooted in an intense need for validation. Jim realized that perhaps his notion of success was too rigidly defined by external approval. What if he reframed his perception? What if success was not only measured in outcomes but also in the growth inherent within himself and his team? The weight of expectation could transform into a positive force if he welcomed it, not shunned it. As the afternoon wore on, he took a deep breath and decided to reach out to his team. He sent an email inviting everyone to a casual brainstorming session. He wanted to make it clear that their voices mattered, that this was a collaborative effort, and that risk was part of innovation. Jim's heart raced as he pressed send. Was he ready to relinquish control and open up to collective creativity? He recognized the vulnerability that came with this decision, but he also understood that it was necessary to cultivate an environment where the team could thrive. The response was immediate. Excitement rippled through the replies, and for the first time, Jim felt a sense of camaraderie sparking to life. Each enthusiastic reply chipped away at his doubt, replacing it with a burgeoning courage. In that moment, Jim not only visualized leading a project but also embracing his own evolution into a more authentic leader. The prospect of failure, once a curse, now felt like a stepping stone toward discovering a truer version of himself. But just as relief washed over him, a sudden realization struck like a thunderclap. If he could adapt and evolve, what would that demand of him in future endeavors? Would embracing vulnerability and collaboration lead to deeper insecurities, or cultivate resilience? Leaving the office for the day, Jim found himself at a crossroads. The moment had shifted from his notions of leadership to a critical turning point where each decision would ripple outwards. Tomorrow, he would have to confront the kind of leader he wanted to be. Was he ready to stand at the front lines of innovation, harnessing not just his own growth but everyone he would lead along the way? The realization loomed as his determination ignited further within him. Change was imminent, and with it, an opportunity to redefine success. The next morning, Jim felt an unusual mix of excitement and trepidation as he entered the office. The anticipation of the brainstorming session loomed large, but so did the echo of his own doubts. Would he be able to foster an open environment? Could he genuinely make space for the ideas of others, or would the weight of his title suffocate their voices? In those early hours, Jim inhabited a mental space charged with duality. He was a man eager to shed old skins while simultaneously grappling with the fear of losing control. He could already envision his team members mingling, ideas bouncing like a pinball machine, but the specter of chaos loomed in his mind. What if the loudest voices drowned out the more subtle, innovative thoughts? What if his efforts to collaborate only ended up in confusion? He arrived at the conference room early, wanting to set the stage for an atmosphere of belonging. Carefully, he arranged chairs in a circle, a symbolic gesture of equality. As he prepared, Jim found himself scrutinizing his reflection in the glass window. The man staring back wore both hope and uncertainty like a well-worn coat. Gradually, his colleagues filed in, their casual chatter filling the room with a warmth that dispelled some of Jim's apprehension. He could see the enthusiasm in each face, a counterweight to his internal struggle. As the session began, he encouraged everyone to share their insights freely, emphasizing that all contributions were valid, without fear of judgment. "Let us create a safe space for our ideas," he announced, his voice steady. "Remember, innovation often blooms from unexpected places." The dialogue flowed. Employees suggested wild ideas, some of which surprised Jim in their creativity. He jotted down notes rapidly, each idea striking a chord deep within him, a glimpse into what leadership could truly mean. Yet, despite the electrifying atmosphere, shadows of doubt whispered in his ear. Would his leadership come off as genuine enough to encourage team members to engage deeply? Was he merely playing the part of the supportive leader while still clinging to old habits of micromanagement? As the session progressed, a particularly insightful employee, Sarah, proposed a concept that jolted Jim's attention. What if we framed our project not just as a necessary business move, but as an opportunity to create a legacy for our company? Think impact over profit. How do we want to be remembered? Those words hit Jim like a thunderbolt. A legacy, could that be the line that connected the dots of his thoughts on leadership, personal growth, and the community he aimed to foster? The idea resonated within him, illuminating a path he had not considered. In that moment, Jim made a conscious choice. He would embrace the role of a servant leader, prioritizing the growth and development of his team while allowing himself to be vulnerable. He began to share his own uncertainties, a pivotal decision that transformed the dynamic in the room. He talked about his doubts, his drive for validation, and the fears of being undermined. As he spoke from the heart, he noticed others leaning in, nodding their heads, showing empathy reflected in their eyes. A wave of relief washed over him as the participants engaged with their own vulnerabilities. An unexpected sincerity permeated the atmosphere, allowing for dialogue to deepen. They shared personal stories that tied their professional aspirations to individual motivations, and for the first time, Jim felt a true sense of connection blossoming. As the brainstorming session came to an end, Jim couldn't help but marvel at the transformation from an ordinary meeting into a session of collective introspection and determination. A new energy vibrated in the room, one that felt invigorated by mutual respect and newfound trust. But as he closed the meeting, a question stirred within him: how would this shift in leadership style affect his decision-making moving forward? Would he struggle with the balance of maintaining authority while fostering collaboration? Would he be able to navigate the complexities of blending his personal growth with the responsibilities of leadership? Leaving the room, Jim felt the pressing weight of the unknown trail ahead. The very thing that had once filled him with dread now inspired his resolve. The moment beckoned him to embrace risks and growth in ways he had yet to understand. There was so much left to explore. Tomorrow, he would confront the challenge of translating this foundational shift into actionable strategies. The essence of his leadership evolution awaited him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the next layer of his journey was on the cusp of revealing itself. As Jim entered the office the next day, determination surged through him, mingling with his lingering doubts. The brainstorming session had ignited something within him, a flicker of potential geared towards transformation. He could no longer view leadership through the narrow lens of authority. Instead, he was stepping into a role that demanded a subtle blend of strength and vulnerability. The morning's agenda was filled with follow-up meetings, and the weight of his recent shift in perspective pressed heavily on his mind. He wondered how he could translate the open dialogue from yesterday into tangible actions that would carry over into the coming weeks. Searching for inspiration, he turned to his notes, filled with everyone's ideas and sentiments. It hit him Jim needed to empower his team by allowing them to take the lead in their respective projects. That's where his focus would begin. He planned to kick off the day by inviting his team to present their concepts based on their previous suggestions. A call to action that might transform those creative sparks into something substantial. He hoped to gather their thoughts about how they could create their project legacies and implement Sarah's vision of impacting the company's future. Once in the conference room, Jim noticed a palpable change. Boundaries seemed blurred, and rank held little importance in the midst of shared aspirations. Employees who had previously shied away from expressing their ideas now seemed poised to claim ownership, and it filled him with renewed optimism. Yet, amidst the invigorating energy, a question nagged at him: would this empowerment create a sense of responsibility among team members, or would it breed anxiety in those unaccustomed to stepping into leadership roles? Diving into the agenda, Jim welcomed individuals to voice their thoughts. As each team member stepped forward, he admired their courage to break free and take the reins of their contributions. He noticed Lisa, a junior member often underestimated, growing more assertive as she proposed a plan that wove in elements from the brainstorming session. Her enthusiasm was infectious, lighting a fire under the rest of the team. Jim's heart swelled with pride and surprise. It was a revelation not just of Lisa's capabilities but also of his own blindness to the potential hidden beneath quiet exteriors. As the meeting unfolded, he felt a shift within himself, the firm grip of control loosening. There was no space for micromanagement in this newfound dynamic. It was time to relinquish the tight hold and trust his team. This balance, he realized, was where true leadership lived. There would still be room for guidance, but not at the cost of stifling creativity. By the time Jim wrapped up the meeting, he was buzzing with excitement, noticing a universal thrill among his colleagues. They were no longer passive participants, they were architects of their destiny. However, the culmination of their ideas also invoked a gnawing fear: could Jim sustain this momentum? What if the weight of his newfound responsibilities overwhelmed him, and he slipped back into controlling habits? Leaving the room, a subtle tension coiled in his gut. The transformation was exhilarating, yet a daunting curveball had been thrown into the mix. What would happen when obstacles arose? Could he navigate the storms while preserving this fragile yet potent flow of trust? As he reflected on these challenges, he felt an urge to reach out to Sarah, the catalyst for this journey. There had to be a way to ensure they remained connected, a support network within the team that could keep their momentum alive. Yet, the prospect of opening a conversation about developing such a structure ignited a shadow of doubt. Would others see it as a backslide into control, or could it be a genuine effort to nurture collaboration? With these thoughts ricocheting through his mind, Jim prepared to confront the complexities ahead. The impending decisions loomed large, testing his mettle and vision. But one fact was crystal clear: his evolution was no longer a solitary endeavor. He was in uncharted waters with a team at his side, and the question burned brightly: how would they weather the storms together? In that pivotal moment, clarity surged through Jim like a jolt of electricity. He realized that leadership was not merely an exercise in authority, but an ever-evolving partnership with the energies and potential of those around him. With this newfound understanding, he was ready to forge not just a successful project, but a transformative legacy. With a resolute heart, Jim gathered his team once more, his voice steady as he addressed the room. Today marks a turning point for us. I want us to embrace the uncertainty ahead, to traverse this journey together. No one person holds the key to our success, we all do. His words resonated, placing the spotlight not just on him, but on each member who comprised the circle of innovators. He stayed true to his vision of empowerment, assigning roles that aligned with his team members' passions and strengths. Lisa spearheaded the project plan, her excitement palpable as she distilled the group's ideas into actionable steps. While observing her, Jim felt a sense of pride swell within. This wasn't just about business, it was about nurturing potential. The energy in the room was electric, sparking creativity and camaraderie as team members rallied behind one another. Within days, they developed a pilot initiative that not only envisioned providing resources to families like Clara's but also built a sustainable model of engagement that transformed the company's approach toward social responsibility. The venture was met with excitement, and Jim felt invigorated. There was no facade of wealth masquerading in this endeavor, it was genuine. Weeks passed, and tangible results began to materialize. Their community project flourished, drawing support from local businesses and forging a network of advocates that grew exponentially. The once skeptical Mark and Alice became staunch supporters, captivated by the unintended ripples of change reflected in their team's morale. Each small victory further solidified Jim's unshakable commitment to purpose over profit. As he navigated these changes, Jim experienced a profound personal growth. The man who had once raced through meetings, chasing numbers, now took time to connect deeply with his team, setting aside his fears for authenticity. He found joy in facilitating discussions, engaging with the nuances of his colleagues' aspirations. Each conversation was a testament to his success, not measured in profits, but in enduring relationships rooted in trust and shared vision. Recognition soon followed. The company received accolades for its innovative approach, and Jim was invited to speak at a national conference. Standing on stage, he shared their journey, the trials, triumphs, and the transformative belief that true leadership emerged from vulnerability and collaboration. The audience was captivated, with rapt attention held across the expanse of the hall. Afterward, the applause surged into a tide of validation, affirming his resolve that he had indeed transcended the hollow pursuit of wealth. Recognition came not only from accolades, but from the authentic relationships he had fostered, the lives they had begun to touch. But more importantly, Jim found fulfillment in the evolution within himself. The anxiety that once kept him tethered to superficial markers of success was replaced by a steadfast belief in the strength of collective potential. He understood now that true leadership sprang from facilitating change and empowering others to discover their capacity for greatness. As he reflected on the path that had brought him here, he stood at the precipice of further encounters, wondering, what would come next? Would the bravery to remain authentic continue to carry him through the challenges ahead? Yet one certainty illuminated his thoughts: leadership is not a position, it is a responsibility. It was his turn to continue expanding his horizons, embracing the change, and leading by example, not just in business, but in life. Jim Tompkins had emerged as a man of substance, a figure not merely defined by the wealth he once idolized but by the impact he had chosen to leave behind, echoing that every individual can transform the world in their unique way. Now, he was ready to step into the next chapter of possibility, a journey fueled by purpose, connection, and unyielding growth. You need to subscribe now to ensure that you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that inspire transformation and success. Leave a like now to help us feed the algorithm, making sure that these powerful narratives reach others who crave change and fulfillment. Comment below your reactions and theories about Jim's incredible journey and what it means for you on your path to success. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion and discover the power of personal growth. Don't wait even one more second to share this message of hope and resilience.